perhaps we should get started. So first of all, welcome. It's really a pleasure to welcome you to UNICEF's webinar series on data collection, and it's organized by the Data and Analytics section here at UNICEF headquarters. I am Archana Dwavedi, and I work with the Data Collection Unit in the Data and Analytics section. We are very happy to actually be resuming the webinar series after a pause of a few months. The series was initiated in September of 2020, and we have had 6 webinars conducted to date, some of them focusing on phone surveys, IVR SMS surveys, remote sensing data, and social advertising data. Today's webinar marks the first in 2021, with the series continuing every Thursday at this time for the next few months. So we look forward to your participation in the others as well. Today's webinar is on UReport, which is a tool that UNICEF uses to engage with young people. During COVID-19, UReport has been used to deliver important messages, but also to gather information. This presentation will provide an introduction to UReport, describing how it can and should be used and how it works. And 2 examples will be presented on how UReport is used for program delivery. One is through strategic planning polls, and the second is the COVID-19 vaccine polls on boosting vaccine confidence. We'll have 2 speakers today. The first speaker, Caroline Muhwezi, is a UReport Global Coordinator in UNICEF. Caroline previously worked with UNICEF Nigeria as the Generation Unlimited Program Specialist. Prior to joining GenU, she set up UReport Nigeria in 2014, and the platform is now reaching over 3.7 million young people. She also set up UReport on the Move in Italy in 2017, and was part of the startup team for UReport Uganda in 2011. When the platform was established, her academic background is in law and new media, and she is passionate about youth participation and advocacy to create change. Our second presenter, Christopher Brooks, is the Senior Digital and Data Specialist for UReport Global, working with the team since 2017 to strengthen UReport's ability to create, utilize, and share data within UNICEF and with external partners. He manages global analysis of polling data and piloted UReport's implementation of the equity tool methodology to enhance the quality of its crowdsourced data for statistical analysis. He is also responsible for supporting country offices in their integration and scale of digital platforms like Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp, personally managing scale efforts, which having engaged over 1 million new users with UReport. So before we start, a bit of housekeeping. We have scheduled an hour and a half for today. After the presentation, we will start the Q&A. As always throughout the webinar, please remember to remain muted. Please do go ahead and write your questions in the chat box, and we will try and group these and direct them to Caroline and Chris during the Q&A period. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on our SharePoint site together with the past webinars, and you can find the link in the email that you have already received. We have plans to post these webinars on a public site so that non-UNICEF colleagues can also access them. So over to you, Caroline and Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Archana, and welcome everyone to today's webinar on UReport, something Chris and I are very passionate about and have been working on for a couple of years now. Heading straight into it, Chris will be sharing the slides for the presentation. I'll start off with just not taking for granted the fact that everyone on this webinar knows what UReport is, sharing with you what UReport is, and then we'll go into the detail of the presentation, after which we'll have the Q&A. So UReport is a free messaging platform for young people, adolescents, youth, and communities, just to engage in the issues that they care about. And these issues range from health to education, water and sanitation, but also including the most vulnerable. And UReport is a platform which started in Uganda, like Achana mentioned, in 2011. This year it will be 10 years of the platform. Currently, it's reaching 13.6 million community members globally. And this is outside the UReport global platform, that's Facebook alone, which has 311,000 young people registered on it. Currently, UReport is in about 77 countries worldwide, with several countries in the pipeline. The map you're seeing shows you where the UReporters are globally, with a concentration in countries like Nigeria that has over 3 million, Cote d'Ivoire 3 million, DRC about 700,000 currently, and several other countries that are scaling really fast, and Uganda 500,000. Moving on quickly to the next slide. The vision of UReport. Our vision is a strong youth engagement platform that's reaching 25 million UReporters in 100 countries by 2025. Looking at a platform that's 10 years this year, and for some of you who have been on UReport or used UReport for a while now, there's a lot in its shape and form that has transformed from what it used to be when we had just started out way back in Uganda. Then it was only on SMS. Currently, the platforms have increased, as you'll get to hear later. So our vision is reaching key advocates for change, but also leveraging the cross-sectoral value that the platform brings to achieve program goals. And here's why this webinar today is super important for us. UReport at scale and at the heart of UNICEF's operation is one of our major aspirations. For us, the power of UReport is in the number of UReporters we have. I think for all the times we've supported countries to start, we always tell them the more UReporters you have, the more credibility the information, and the more the leaders and other stakeholders are interested in listening to what they're saying. Then also advancing how much we're doing with programs, emergency and advocacy, but also integrating UReport both at global, regional and local level. Currently, you'll find that UReporters are not only running local polls, they're also running regional polls. SR has been doing that quite a lot lately. But then you also have scenarios where there's always need for a very focused regional intervention. So using the power of UReporters when you have millions in your particular region also adds value. But also the global polls are something that we do oftentimes, probably every once in a quarter, the most recent being the COVID-19 vaccine polls, which Chris will speak to you about later. Then we also hope to expand the use of UReport data to both inform the work of our partners as well, including government and multilateral organizations and corporates, expanding our UReport to other new platforms through artificial intelligence and machine learning. Our aspiration is that the platform cannot stay what it has always been for the past couple of years. It's now a decade. We want to explore and get on to speed. I mean, the young people today probably who wanted to send an SMS 10 years ago, right now on so many other competing platforms, TikTok, Instagram. So we have to see how do we measure up and fit the times and need of the community that we're trying to work with, to both deliver on our programs, but also to respond to their needs. And also we hope to strengthen UReport as a partners platform, really making sure that we address the needs both of our communities, but in collaboration with our partners, which I think is very key for programs who are on this call today. Looking at the growth, I spoke about scale, but just to bring you to speed on where we are with that, we're looking at an increase of UReporters, about 5 UReporters, sorry, every 5 seconds having a new user signing up for UReport. Currently, we have up to 4 million responses per month on UReport, and we have countries that have really, proved a lot of scale even during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's why it's important that even in these challenging, extraordinary times, we know that that hasn't stopped and that hasn't. That shouldn't challenge the vision that we have for scale. We've seen a rapid increase between November and March this year, and that's setting us at about 13.69 currently. Moving on. So when I mentioned the platforms that we have moved on to right now, beyond the SMS that we started with, we're running UReport also on WhatsApp, Facebook, Messenger, and Viber as well. And this notwithstanding some of the challenges we have with some of these platforms, which we'll speak to later, but just so you're aware that these are platforms that we have for running UReport. You'll find oftentimes most countries where SMS will work for some may prefer another platform. Moving to the next. Okay, so UReport can be used in different ways to deliver on both program, humanitarian, but also in advocacy. We have 4 major ways through which we use UReport. UReport, most people who set up UReport in country offices and when programs approach you, I think usually the first thing they've asked the times when I've been running UReport at country level has been, we want to send out a poll, So let this be the webinar where UReport does way more than polls. There's a lot more to UReport than just the next poll. So the regular polls are just one part of what UReport can do. But then also UReport can have established chatbots, which are also known as information centers, where UReporters get information by simply typing a trigger word, and then they get the information they need. For example, we had a COVID-19 bot where UReporters would just type the word COVID-19 and get all the information that they want. And then recently the COVID-19 vaccine chatbot as well, which UReporters would type in COVID-19 vax, whether on Facebook, Messenger, WhatsApp, or SMS, and get the information that they need as well. And the live chats are also another powerful avenue of using the platform. I'll give you an example. Recently, Cote d'Ivoire worked together with its partners, the Ministry of Health, its health team, to be able to respond to questions from your reporters on the COVID-19 vaccines. This is a country that had sent out polls on COVID-19 vaccines, and there was a lot of vaccine hesitancy that was seen through the poll results that they got. So they followed up with a live chat where they answered over 3,000 questions in the 3 hours of doing the live chat, which was absolutely incredible. And I think that's a very good opportunity that programs have that can be replicated across all areas, whether it's during an Ebola outbreak, whether it's during flooding, the same platform, the same modes of using UReport apply, and ultimately mobilizing young people. We've had scenarios where young people have done cleaning in communities, climate change, planting trees, and taking part in those actions. And to mention but a few, because there's really quite a lot that UReport has done. You can imagine, it's a decade. Yeah, moving to the next. Okay, so when we look at UReport setup process, I've said quite a lot about what it is, how it works, what examples are there. It's a whole list on setting up UReport, but ultimately, I think to summarize the slide that you're looking at, I think what's very important is, as a program manager or as someone who's running UReport in a country office, I think that the different steps that you need to look at. One, inevitably, is familiarizing yourself with what the key principles are on UReport. It's not just another social media platform. And then a country office needs to have a concept note that clearly articulates which partners will they be working with, how will they be using the platform. UReport is not one of those things you start and then you say, for some of these things, we'll figure it out along the way. By the time you start, you better know which partners are you going to work with that will help you support scale, for example. And then what's the budget that you have? You don't want to underestimate what you need to start, and then halfway you can't sustain it. And then also looking at the vendor, the mobile network operating company, if you're going to do it via SMS, as well as the team that will run the platform. We've seen scenarios where countries are very enthusiastic to start UReport, but then they're in between, or maybe the PME, program specialist will do it in the meantime. It's not something about doing it in the meantime. You need someone who's dedicated, who's going to do the work. And then when you look at deploying UReport, when it comes to deploying UReport, we've been working very closely also with the Office of Innovation, setting up both for the global LTAs that we have for the SMS aggregator. I'm sure some of you in country offices are not taking anything for granted. I've heard a lot about a company called Nyaruka, which is on LTA. The platform on which UReport is hosted is called Rapid Pro, and it's managed by Nyaruka. So inevitably, contracts have to be signed up with it. And then we connect you with the ICT team, the innovation team, to help you in terms of setup at that stage. And then we have a branding tool. We have a team that helps with brands, so you can select your logo. And sorry about that. I think someone is not muted. Okay, cool. Yeah, so we have a branding team that helps you with your logo and logo designs. We've also had countries that then come back to us to say probably our government would prefer this, our partners would want this. So it's a bit of an exchange between the global team, the country office, the branding and design team, as well as ICTD now that also works with us on the back end for some of the setup that's involved. So ultimately, there is the whole launch package that's set up to support you to set out your report. We have a country support specialist, probably some of you already know her. She's called Hira, who also does amazing, really holding the countries by hand in hand to make sure they're ready to roll out and they're good to go once they're interested in running your report. Moving to the next, Chris. Okay, so if we go to application of UReport by programs and really looking at what exactly is it programs need to be able to apply UReport, I think for starters, it's very important to have clarity on what it is that you want to get out of your report, right? It's not a matter of, oh, there is this platform that we have. Maybe for some of you, it's still under the innovation section within your country office program. So it's what do you need community feedback on, specifically young people, but also recognizing that some UReport platforms have more than just young people. So what is it you want feedback on, but also ensuring that you involve the stakeholders in program design of what you're going to use the platform for ultimately. Who's crafting those questions that are going to go out? If you're looking at a poll, for example, if it's a chatbot, who's developing the information that's going to inform the chatbot? Then how will the data collected be used to inform program? I think one avenue to really both scale and support the growth of this platform, I would say, is ensuring that it's not just data that's collected. Again, it's been quite a number of years for some countries that have run this platform, and also recognizing the fact that some are probably new on the platform. They've just launched the platform. But it's always important as the program manager or the program chief who's going to use this platform, find out what has already been run on functioning water points, if you are a WASH chief, for example, or if you're looking at information that's covering a particular program area, maybe exclusive breastfeeding, what have the results already shown and how can I make use of that? I think we also need to move away from just creating new polls, and that's for countries that already are running this platform, but are you utilizing the data that has been got off this platform? For countries that have had it for 10 years, then I think even a greater onus on what are you doing with the data. So I think for us, it's really on the use of the data more than just collecting extra data. Then do you have the resources to support the advocacy? When your reporters are approached, you already set a standard that you're going to, first of all, give them feedback. They'll hear back from you. So you don't just send out the polls and then they don't hear anything else. But then also you set expectations. We always had this thing. I think the first poll that went out in Uganda was for a functioning water point. And the scouts in that video were saying, oh, there's not water at this tap. They open it, it's not there. I'll use your report. But naturally, what goes on in the mind of a young person then is, when I use your report, there better be someone coming to fix the tap or fix the unfunctioning water point, So you raise expectations. So then as program, then you need a clear game plan on who are we working with to address the issues once we get the feedback. So not just to collect the data for the next report or the next documentation. At times we're very obsessed with our own reports and our own internal expectations, but the communities also have their expectations as well. Then making sure that your report is part of the programming work plan. I would want to hope that we're not yet so far into the year, but probably right now everyone has their clear plans for the year. But what ultimately is very important is at the onset of the year, when you're having your work plans for program sections, especially the UReport colleagues on this call, I implore you to make sure you're sitting together with your program leads to ensure that as they're looking at any area in their program interventions where they will need community feedback, youth participation, or adolescent participation, let your report be there among the avenues that will be used. Then you know that you're applying your report effectively for program. Moving on to the next. Okay, then I would like also to raise the scenario where we're using UReport, especially in the affected population, for example, in humanitarian context in the Northeast. Right now, it's being called UReport 24/7 in Nigeria, for example, where this platform is. But it's also important to see how UReport really comes in handy, even in emergency situations, as a critical tool, both to disseminate life-saving information, and this has really proved its cause, especially both during, COVID, the pandemic, when we've had flooding in Nigeria. We had two scenarios of Ebola outbreak, where rumors like, oh, can we bathe with hot water and salt, or take bitter kola nut to address Ebola? And quickly the platform came in very handy. So in places where we can both gather the life-saving information and use it in emergencies, it has been super useful. And for this particular function of UReport, we're working closely with the emergency specialist on innovation, who's now with EMOPS, Fatu. Some of you probably know her. And it's just important, just so we have that clarity and coordination between the emergency teams and the platforms that we use, because there are areas where you'll have to be sure that you're coordinating very well with a program specialty in that area, and not imagine just because you're a UReport focal point, you're suddenly an emergency specialist as well. So that collaboration is very useful. Moving on to the next. Okay. I'll also just quickly talk about the country use case of Nigeria, where you use UReport for primary healthcare facilities just to check their functionality. This was a very successful intervention that we had in 2016, and we had the healthcare workers in the facilities themselves reporting on the facility functionality and assessment. And this also informed the health section costing of PHC per ward, of 1 PHC per ward, which was then presented to the Health Senate in Nigeria then. And I think what's very exciting is currently, right now, functionality of PHCs is one of our global advocacy priorities are under health right now. So I think it's important to see how those tools and avenues that we used then can be replicated even right now under that health priority of increasing primary health care and access. Moving on to the next, Chris. We also recently had the Your Voice, Your Future report. This was in collaboration with the African Union and the European Union. Probably several of your countries participated in it. And this was working very closely with the different regions, but trying to also show both the compatibility and, encouraging the collaboration between new reporters across the different regions. The results of the campaign are to inform the EU Youth Summit that's happening in 2021. But also it was good to see the voices of your reporters that came out on areas like education, climate change, and then now it's upon those specific governments where even the UReport has participated to take those voices concretely forward. So we have that report, and we've linked the link in the PowerPoint, and we'll be able to share this with you after the call. So then all this evidence-based advocacy and the reports that we generate are also really super useful. It's always good to see how does the data tie into what either stakeholders are going to work on. I know at the very onset of UReport in Uganda, we also used to work directly with the Uganda Parliamentary Forum for Children, where we used to develop a newsletter to share with them. So it's always, how does this evidence that you generate enter into a package where leaders will be able to see it, stakeholders can access it. And I think the best way to do that is through collaboration with programs who also have that direct access to government. Yeah. Moving to the next. So looking at the challenges in implementation, I know I've said so many amazing things for your report. It's probably my job, but then I think it's also good to be honest about what the challenges are in implementing your report and how we can counter them. I think some of them are more of missed opportunities than challenges, but anyway, you'll decide as you run the platform. So one of the challenges we've had, especially when working with programs and approaching your report program for data collection, has been the length of surveys. At times when programs approach a UReport manager, I'll speak like in the context of a country office, if you get 10 questions or 15 questions, I want to run this on, for example, let's say, I don't know, immunization. We have the World Immunization Week coming up at the end of April. So if the length of the survey is too long, then also just being able to break that down into bite-sized information for your reporters is a bit of rigorous work. We don't ignore the fact that some reporters, especially in the rural areas and the poorer communities, are using UReport off SMS. SMS has a character limit, about 160 characters, So if you're going to send a 3-in-1 SMS, I don't know how many of you still use SMS today, and if you see a 3-in-1 message, if you keep reading it. So if you don't keep reading it, why do you think your reporters would keep reading it? So I think it's very important to pay attention to the length of the surveys that you're sending out if they are polls. Personally, I always encourage not more than 5 questions. I think beyond 5 at the 5th question, you've lost so many people who are participating in the poll, and they ultimately just drop out. Yet your whole aim to run the poll is to get feedback and to get from as many people as possible. Then also the scale of programs. When programs are still small or very new countries, I mean, if you're going to speak to 200 people, I don't know how many presidents would change their policies for over 20 voices or 30 responses, and you say, oh, I have your report, So I think the scale of the program really matters. When we're starting out your report in Nigeria in 2014, I remember then the chief of health kept mentioning, I want 1 million. Without 1 million, I can't go to the Senate. Without 1 million, I can't go to the House of Representatives. And our whole goal was, Nigeria, for the voices of your reporters to be heard, it can't be less than 1 million. And we went with that mindset in mind, So scale is really key because it affects so many things around both the data use and also the impressions that it creates around stakeholders and government and partners. Then also the poll calendar. Countries typically, if your program officers have already not told you this, your report ideally runs on a poll calendar. So you'll have scenarios where a certain section suddenly has need to use the platform, but then the poll calendar, for example, is on a rotational basis. Excuse me, for example, sorry. Okay, so sorry. So for example, if the poll calendar is not catering for a particular section at the time, then it's important that other sections know it's not just you wake up and you want a poll, the poll goes out the next day. You should be able to clearly know how is this rotating either through programs and with partners and also with young people themselves. So with the specific stakeholders who are running the platform. Moving to the launching of a UReport program and the challenges that are there, SMS costs. Some countries have been successful in getting MOUs with SMS companies. In Nigeria, we had Airtel and an MOU with Airtel. I think Cote d'Ivoire probably with Orange right now, they're functioning without paying for it. But then there are countries that have a challenge with the costs of SMS. So that has to be kept in mind, but also recognizing the fact that both PD and OI, Office of Innovation, are looking at how to address those costs by setting up global MOUs that countries can benefit from. Then also looking at the lack of government support at times. For me, what I would mention, and at least from my field experience, is you don't automatically have to expect the government support at the onset of setting up your report. I think your report is more of something that you have to prove it works by having it running as well, So ultimately, like I mentioned earlier, at scale, no one will doubt you. At 10 or 20 or 100, probably no one will have time to listen to you because there are other competing platforms as well. Then also internally, just within UNICEF, I think it's also very important to mention the internal buy-in. That's super important, because other sections are your clients as well. And it's very important that the sections both believe in the platform, but also are ready to use it, and managing the expectations is the other challenge on your report. We don't sell, I don't know, roses and sunshine on your report. So it's no guarantee by all means that it addresses all communication needs. It's only one platform, but it works best in collaboration with others. So just to mention that there are several other data biases, which Chris will also come in to mention, but just overall, those are the key challenges. Okay. So I'll speak to the indicators of successful or useful data. I'll handle the first part and then hand over to Chris, who will come in. He's our data guru on the team. So Successful data on UReport for me, or the success of the platform, really, like I mentioned earlier, is both on the use of the data and making sure that the data is utilized. But outside that, it's also strong partners to support scale. And giving you an example, in Uganda, when we started out with UReport, by the time we were 6 months into running UReport, and this is way back 2011, we had the Scouts on board, we had Galga, we had the faith-based organizations, Catholic Secretariat, Muslim Supreme Council. So all the different networks that reach young people, that reach communities, were spoken to about this platform. And this was in collaboration with our program sections, which directly work with those teams, whether it's C4D, whether it's the communication section or health or education. Education was then working with the girls' education movement. So that way it was easier for us to reach so many girls, talk to them about UReport, use the platform to help in go back to school campaigns, and then we could quickly see the success of the platform. So it's important that you identify who are your strong partners that will support scale, both internally, partners you already have as program, but also even externally as well. Then also having a functioning steering committee. This usually is a challenge because at times it's a good to have, but also its efficacy and how effective it is, I could say at times it's very ambitious. It's aspirational to have a perfect one, but if you have one that's functioning, well and good, because you also don't want a scenario where it's only an internal development of poll questions. You need to run this by the steering committee, would have maybe young people as representatives on it, maybe faith-based organizations or a student body that has a representative. That way they review the questions before they go out. And also when you get the results, at times they contribute to the dissemination of the results and to the action that's going to follow the results. So having a steering committee is really good. Functioning, perfect. Then a poll calendar to guide you. I already alluded to that earlier. The programmatic buy-in for critical usefulness of the data. I also alluded to that, I think, earlier, mentioning that it's important that you have the support of other program sections. Usually for UReport to succeed, I think in any country office, and at least those I've worked in, I've always known who the UReport champion is, because when you have a UReport champion, they will drive it, whether this is the program section chief or the deputy representative. The senior management support is absolutely useful because, if you have the senior management support in driving UReport, then by all means you'll go places, because then you can collaborate with other countries who are doing it well, but then they themselves can also think through with program how to fundraise and resource for it, which usually is also a challenge. So with that, I'll then hand over to Chris to share with you the indicators of successful use of data when it comes to being utilized by program. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Caroline. Yeah, that's a really excellent rundown of all of the different aspects of the bigger picture of UReport. I'm going to go through the second half of this slide and a few more slides, which will focus a little more on the data itself and some questions around the representativeness, how the data is taken from the platforms, things like this. So again, talking about how UReport can be utilized by program, it is critical, as Caroline has said, and as we want to always impress, that the data is being used, and that is, useful data is successful data. Data can be used to influence policy, can be used to support advocacy. We're always looking in general on UReport for outcomes with and for young people. In terms of what is quality and useful data, if, for example, you are creating an opportunity to collect data from young people on the UReport program, you might consider a combination of categorical and open response questions. We can very easily present a number of different options to users and have them select between those options, but it can also be very valuable to collect the actual words of a UReporter, of a young person, in response to a question in a way that can help maybe humanize them, where percentages and numbers of respondents don't do the same. The scale of responses, as Caroline was saying, is a real benefit, not so much for representativeness, but for the credibility of the voices. And we always look at this is our theory of change, which is scale, engage, and change. And it all starts with the scale of the platforms. It's very useful to develop useful segmentations, and the useful segmentations will depend on the different programs that are active and important within each different area where your report is deployed. But as an example, it might be a segmentation between people that live in an urban versus a rural area. These segmentations can be created by, as for example, just asking young people questions about themselves and then saving that data within the UReport platform so that later targeted interventions can be made against those specific UReporters. Finally, non-redundant and non-obvious questions, I think are always kind of a best practice. As I'll explain more in detail, UReport data on its own isn't representative. It's not statistically representative. And there isn't much value for us in understanding that 90% of young people in a particular area enjoy something that is pretty obviously enjoyable for young people. But you know, once we get to answering questions that will come very close to influencing policy, maybe things that we don't feel we have a strong understanding of today, that's where these non-obvious, non-redundant questions can provide really useful for us. I wanted to go into detail a little bit about two different types of data collection we do using UReport. And we've mentioned both of these use cases, but this will be a little more detail. There is polling. I'll give you two just examples here. These are some screenshots from the recent COVID-19 vaccine poll that was sent out by a number of different countries. On the top is the categorical data, where we can understand, based on people's responses, a percentage of people in this case that responded that they would get the vaccine if it was recommended to them, versus people that did not respond that they would get the vaccine if it was recommended to them. Meaning that either they said they're not sure or they said no, they won't get it. Below that, you can see an actual quote from a UReporter in a follow-up question for people who said that they weren't sure or they would not get the vaccine. This young woman is saying, I feel it has been rushed and not enough scientific research to ensure it's fully safe. And of course, that on its own is not, is very anecdotal data, but in terms of communicating a story and making an impact on people, I think having these open response quotes is very useful. So polling data, it's representative of the views and the experience of the respondents. And it's critical to understand that UReport data in general is not representative of broader populations of young people in the countries and regions where it operates. When UReport data comes through our systems, there's no weighting done to it by default. So if there is an over-representation of one gender versus another in the data, that won't be weighted by default when the results are presented. But of course, if you're working directly with a UReport program and collecting data that is going to support your program, you can always ask them for the demographic information that they've received from the users so that you could do your own weighting after the fact. All this to say that the data is not statistically significant and it shouldn't be used as a single source of information to make decisions, but we do believe that it's very powerful representation of young people and can be used alongside other more statistically significant methods to tell a more complete story of how young people experience different issues and their views on different issues. On the right-hand side, we have reporting, and I have the chart here from the case study that Caroline mentioned earlier about Nigeria. In this case, we're talking about individuals reporting things that are actually happening, that they're observing in their communities. And we see this as being not a question of can we extrapolate this to a larger population, but instead, can we ground truth some things that are happening in the community? And in this case, it was the health facilities where we found that 0% of them are functional. This can be a really pretty accurate representation of the respondent's experience and understanding of the situation. And if we give specific instructions or more information about how a respondent should perhaps consider their answer, we can get even more accurate on their reflections. Here, we find it can be used as a reliable representation of people's actual reported experiences, and it can be a very valuable part of a ground truthing process, as in the case study. Now, there are biases in UReport data that will be probably more skewing results when we're talking about polls, but can lead to underrepresentation when we're talking about reporting data. UReport is primarily a youth engagement platform and doesn't generally have a goal of producing unbiased data or samples. So unless you have some particular method that you're using or some particular discussion with the UReport program, the data is not going to be unbiased or statistically significant. There are coverage biases that could be introduced in several ways. Of course, there's a requirement that respondents have or can use a mobile phone and also have service, and this can impact wealth, or rather this can introduce biases for coverage for wealth accessibility, meaning people with disabilities may be lesser able to use phones, or it could also mean people with lower literacy rates may be less able to access the service. And also, of course, a breakdown between urban and rural. People within urban areas may have an easier time getting phone service than people in rural areas. The methods used to recruit UReporters, which might be different kinds of advertising and promotion. It could be certain partner organizations. For example, if UReport in a country is partnered with the Girl Guides and Girl Scouts, then it could be that those particular people connected to that organization are overrepresented in the UReport population. Again, this is a potential. And then finally, languages that are supported. UReport programs tend to attempt to support the major languages in each country, but particularly when we're talking about marginalized groups or refugee migrant groups, there is always a possibility that the languages won't be included in the UReport program. It's always good to check with your program managers on that. Finally, of course, classic survey biases are present in UReport data, like self-selection bias. There's survivorship bias, meaning that people who are more likely to continue to use the platform are more likely to respond to more polls. So in some ways, it's likely that you're going to get more response to people who are more engaged with UReport. There is response bias in that the platform today isn't able to randomize questions and answer order. And there's also, of course, social desirability bias, although that is mitigated somewhat because these can be very personal. And also, of course, the platform is anonymous. But as you have a conversation with your phone in an automated service, maybe there's less bias here than if you were talking with a surveyor, an actual person who was speaking to you in person. Finally, demographic data that's provided by UReporters is voluntary and is provided by the respondents without verification. Of course, all the respondents are anonymous, so it would be not possible for us to verify that information. To share some do's and don'ts about using the platform, it's always good to keep communications short and simple. Caroline mentioned this before. It's a real benefit to write in ways that the audience will understand and enjoy. So if you're reaching young people, or there's a possibility that your audience has varying levels of literacy, you might consider not using technical language, not using UNICEF lingo that young people wouldn't be familiar with, or might be might find a less interesting and enjoyable experience. Consider where you want to field the poll. So maybe you want to field the poll with a multi-country UReport platform. Maybe you want to work with the UReport global team or one of the regional hubs for a coordinated action, meaning a single poll that goes out from several countries at once. Or maybe you just want to work with a single program. Depending on your needs, you might consider engaging in these different ways. You should always be careful about how you represent the responses of UReporters, and this ties into the fact that it's not a statistically representative tool. So we would always say UReporters said XYZ, or the respondents to the poll indicated. And we also make use of the past tense rather than the present tense, meaning that we would, rather than say young people say this, we would say young people said this, as in historically in this one particular poll, not that it's extrapolatable to what young people are saying today. And finally, using the data you receive to advocate for young people or improve UNICEF and partners' work for beneficiaries. This is a big do. As we've said multiple times, it's always good for us to have a clear goal in mind and be able to use that data for young people. Maybe just to add a couple don'ts that are that don't really have a mirror on the do side. We should not ask questions that might re-traumatize U-reporters. So for example, related to violence against children, or ask questions on sensitive topics without providing referral resources. And that might be, if we're asking questions about mental health, we might provide a referral resource for someone who is depressed or is struggling with their mental health. And finally, don't see U-Report as a quick fix tool. It's part of a portfolio of data collection and communication tools. Deploying U-Report in your country on its own is not going to solve a whole long list of problems. It's more going to support in a couple of different areas that it'll be really effective in. I wanted to speak a little bit about different, well, one particular way that we can address biases within U-Report data. There is a methodology called the equity tool methodology that has been developed in using data from DHS and MIX and also other sources, large, statistically representative demographic surveys. The equity tool methodology takes those long surveys with tons and tons of questions and simplifies as much as possible in order to come up with a list of generally between 8 to 15 short questions with a couple different answer options that can reliably estimate whether a respondent is in the lowest wealth quintile within their country, the highest wealth quintile within their country, basically which quintile they're in. And we have developed a way to deploy this within the UReport platform towards two goals. One is creating kind of sample groups which have an equitable distribution among the 5 wealth quintiles. And we can also report back on the respondents to a broad poll, not all of them, but people that have completed the equity tool process. We can report back on which quintile those people are within, so there can be a weighting process afterward. The equity tool methodology is available for 65 countries today. Many of those already have UReport programs. And then if you're thinking about launching a new UReport program, it's very possible that there might be an equity tool methodology developed for that country already. And if you're interested in more information about that, we have a link to a paper that we published recently at the bottom of the page here. I'm just going to look at the time. Okay, so we have some examples of the UReport data case studies here. These are all links, and once the presentation goes out, you'll be able to click through on these and look at the different examples. But we have contributed data to 2 State of the World's Children reports. There was a really excellent report developed by DAPM in 2018 called A Right to Be Heard, which was using UReport data to listen to children and young people on the move. Of course, there's the AU and EU report, which Caroline mentioned earlier. There is the Power of UReport, which is a story on ICON, which has some excellent examples and case studies of how UReport is used. And there's also the UReport Strategic Plan Poll report, which is coming soon. I believe this data has already been shared on one of these webinars by a member of the DAPM team. What we have that's still in progress is a combination of the 2 youth engagement team platforms within DOC. That would be UReport and also Voices of Youth. So a great example of how we can combine different data sources with UReport data to produce a kind of a combined interesting piece of data or report. And finally, the UReport COVID-19 vaccine poll report. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to not go into detail on that. There's the link here. And if people are very interested, then maybe we can review part of that as part of the Q&A. And for the last slide here, I'll pass it back to Caroline, who can talk a little bit about how we achieve change with the UReport program.
Thanks, Chris. I think the last slide pretty much sums up what we've been trying to say over the past close to 1 hour, which is really pretty much for us to, as we increase in scale, then we can have the results when we are actioning on the data. The data needs users of the data. If it's not being utilized, then it does not serve the purpose to which we're having the platform. So UReport can generate data to solve the problems, but it's people that solve the problems. So it's program sections, it's the partners that you're working with, and not just having the data in itself. And like I mentioned, this will vary from how long platforms have had this, how long programs have had this platform, which will, I mean, from 10 to 1 year to 2 weeks for those that have just launched. Kenya very recently, which is much newer. So it's really on how are you utilizing that data over a period of time for you to be able to concretely see the results in partnership with whether it's other agencies that are using the data, civil society organizations, government, or other partners. I've seen a couple of questions in the chat box as trying to take notes. I don't know how you want us to do this, Achana. Probably I'll hand over to you, then we take it from there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Caroline and Chris, for such a comprehensive review of UReport, how it's used, how do you go about it, but also focusing on the data collection side of it and how that data can be used, which is the focus of this particular webinar. So I think it gave everybody a very well-rounded information about UReport for those who may be approaching it for the first time, but also those who are using it and are part of it. So thank you so much. I found it very rich information. So yes, we will go into the Q&A. So continue to please put your questions in. I have taken note on the ones so far, but I see there's lots more going on. So perhaps we could start with a couple of things. I've tried to group some of them. One of them, if we could perhaps start with just the overall how UReport can be used. So some people are asking, has it been used for child rights, COVAX, which Chris, you just mentioned, the use of machine learning and AI within UReport to drive AAP, and learning from failures. I think it was sort of lessons learned. So maybe we could tackle sort of that group of the different ways it can be used, but also the learnings from failures. And then we can go on to the perhaps more technical data issues in the next round. Over to you.
Okay, I'll hand over to Chris to come in for those which I might have missed. So I'll take 3 which I had seen. Starting with the question on disaggregated data and how, if UReport can do that. I think I saw a question on if we want to target the 15 to 19-year-olds. I think this takes me back to a conversation I had with a colleague from EDAP last week. If the target of your audience is, for example, the adolescent group, there are 2 ways to do that. UReport, you can have groups created on the platform and focus your message or your poll questions to that particular group, which we call targeted polling. Because at the point of registration, even though the platform is anonymous, UReporters enter their age, their name or nickname, location, gender, if they wish. So you can target depending on, for example, a particular state or district or LGA. So if you want, for example, 15 to 19-year-olds from a previous adolescent activity that you have done as a program section, then ideally what we also encourage is, if it's with the consent of those young people, you can set up a group and then you can follow up with a conversation later, which is really useful because I think from country experience, we've seen better results when we directly coordinate and speak to the groups on UReport, or when it's targeted polling, for example, to a state that's having floods, which we've done in Nigeria. When you have flooding, you don't have flooding in the whole country. Nigeria is 36 plus 1 states, So if we then specifically target the poll to the 4 states that are having flooding, then you can easily identify, who are you going to speak to, where are you sending them, what are the high ground areas, and what are the low grounds. So UReport can do that through targeted polling and creating groups. The other question on machine learning and artificial intelligence, I'll speak briefly to that, and Chris, you can come in here. I think for us, our aspiration is to see how best can we answer to the many unsolicited questions that we get on UReport. I mentioned that we get over 4 million responses a month. Imagine a scenario where UReport Cote d'Ivoire organized a live chat and responded to 3,000 questions in 3 hours. If there was any way we could get the platforms that we have, and this is both the Rapid Pro platform where we, create the floors and set up the poll questions from, we have the U Partners page, which could, artificial intelligence also about the smart way in which predictive text can be sent to the UReporters and those questions are responded to. Because right now it's absolutely very manual to respond to questions during a live chat. A country with huge scale, whether the size of Nigeria, if you're going to have a very elaborate discussion with UReporters on a live chat, you reach a point where you wish some of these answers, if you've already gathered them from program sections, could automatically go to the UReporters. So imagine if there was a live chat on COVID-19, then there's predictive tests that will automatically go to any UReporter who's asking about AstraZeneca or whether it's Moderna or any other vaccine that's available. So over and above just the chatbots we create, we believe that if we can also explore into AI and machine learning, especially using our U Partners page that we have that collaborates what we have already on UReport, would be able to do quite a lot on that. Chris, would you want to take any other question as I go through the others?
Sure, maybe I'll just talk a little bit about the AI and machine learning as well. Caroline, an excellent point, like using machine learning to be able to field some of the inquiries we get that can't necessarily be fielded at scale by individual program managers is excellent. There's also a real opportunity in terms of, as Caroline was explaining earlier, the UReport chat line. So in some countries, for example, Mozambique, we have developed chat lines. The example from Mozambique is a sexual and reproductive health education chat line where young people can text in and ask questions about safe sex, about HIV, and other important topics. And we would love, and the Mozambique team is in fact working on this, to be able to take that database we have of questions and answers to develop a model whereby we could facilitate the answering of simple questions, to a certain level of confidence, and use that to scale that chat line in a greater way in Mozambique, but also then potentially translate that model to other languages and deploy it in other places. We have, I think, a really great opportunity in a lot of ways to use machine learning on UReport. There'll be some interesting developments, I hope, in the near future. Yes, and as Kola said, artificial intelligence and machine learning for U partners, that's it exactly. Maybe I'll just take a couple here. Let's see. Any reflections?
Sorry to interrupt. In your remarks, maybe you want to take some of the equity tool questions from Harer as well as from Senin and some others while you have the floor.
Sure. I've read some of these questions already. The first thing I want to do is just be really clear that the equity tool methodology is developed by an outside set of researchers and scientists and statisticians. If you go to equitytool.org, you can find out more information about the methodology itself. What we've done is implemented that methodology within Rapid Pro and within UReport, and started to find different uses for it within the platform. So I've seen a couple of the different questions here. We have, regarding slide 18, how do you evaluate producing an equity index with limited indicators with data that come from a very selective group and compare with the DHS Wealth Index? And if such differences occur as expected, how should UReport data results be used by readers? I'm going to just be honest and say I don't understand the full context of the question, but the equity tool methodology itself, which is robust beyond my ability to explain it, is designed for this kind of use, to be able to evaluate individuals, whether it's from a statistically representative or like a statistically random sample, or just individuals within a population, and understand how they fit within those 5 equity quintiles. So as we understand it, we're applying the methodology in a proper way, and we don't really see differences between the DHS and our equity index, because our equity index is based on the DHS and is statistically, there's a statistic extrapolation, if you will. So someone's asking, can you clarify what is the purpose of the equity tool? Is it for identifying the profile of respondents, or post-stratification for some level of representativity? It can be used, so we really use it in a few ways. In terms of data collection, it can be used to create a subsample of the UReport program, where we can be confident that the people we put in this subsample are equitably distributed across the 5 wealth quintiles. It doesn't mean that those people are going to respond to our polls at the same rate, but it means that we start from a place of equitability within that sample. Can also be used for post-stratification. I'm not an expert in what would be the exact right way to deploy it, but you would probably want to post-stratify along with your age and gender, maybe region information based on population surveys, and also what's within the data that you get from UReport. The other way that we use it is to better understand our population of UReporters. One of the things that, if you read the paper, you'll see is that we used it to understand what was the wealth distribution of people who were using UReport through SMS versus digital channels. And we found that people using UReport through SMS were much more represented among the lower wealth quintiles, and people using it on digital channels were more represented among the higher wealth quintiles. So while the goal there isn't statistical representativeness, the goal would be ensuring that we reach more marginalized people within the country, and ensuring that we, even though we have a platform that requires a certain amount of connectivity and perhaps a device to access, that we're still reaching people who are within the lower wealth quintiles.
Caroline, did you want to pick up some more? I've also seen something about recruitment and how do you recruit, as well as ethics, especially for under 18s.
All right. Okay. So I'll pick up a couple that I'd taken note of. So one of how do you recruit or enlist your reporters? Just maybe to reiterate, because I think we mentioned this in the presentation. So countries recruit, and I'm saying how we recruit, I'm speaking in the form of at a country office level, because as UReport Global, we're not out recruiting, it's more of we're supporting countries to recruit. So country offices recruit UReporters through partners. It's the partners that support scale. And by partners in this case, I'm referring to whether it's youth organizations or youth networks that have, reached thousands or hundreds of young people. But minus they are reaching young people, you also want to consider what is the real action they do with those young people, because you don't want a scenario where you only have a partner for boosting scale, but you don't have a partner that will also support you to deliver on what the UReporters will be expecting, So I'll give you an example. For example, Nigeria works closely with the National Youth Service Corps, and that's exactly the partner that they are using to boost scale. So every time these young people congregate, then they can be able to register. So when you ask how do we help you recruit, I think I'll take that back to the partners that program sections work with. You find different program sections have, whether it's community networks that you work with to deliver, whether it's WASH committees, if it's water, sanitation, and hygiene. I know health has several partners that are really grassroots level and that reach community members. So it's through any of your partners that actually have a community reach that you can support scale on your report, if you're looking at how to recruit. The other, and I think that was from Priscilla, The other question is on what are experiences on driving UReport in for accountability for affected population. I alluded to the example of what we're doing in Nigeria with UReport 24/7 for Bono, Adamawa, Yobe in the northeastern part. But also we have several case studies on what we have done in the humanitarian context, even for Mozambique during the flooding as well. And we have those case studies ready and we're happy to share with them after the presentation. More concretely speaking, I think we've come in very handy, especially during disease outbreaks when specific information is needed by those communities as well, but also during times when we're just reviewing both their access to services and facilities. Typically, at times, you'll find your reporters reporting that either they've been made to pay for a service they were not supposed to pay for. And that's, I think, what Chris was alluding to when he was talking about how the platform can also be used for reporting and assessing feedback from community members when programs are being delivered. So we can share those use cases with you. We have about 5 case studies that were done on that. Then Charles, you mentioned about how has UReport been concretely used for COVAX, to support COVAX. Like Chris alluded to, the UReport COVID-19 vaccine polls, we had over 266,000 responses. We just released the report. We'll share it again alongside this presentation. It's linked in as well. I think for us, it was very important to be able to assess the perceptions of UReporters who responded to that poll. About 8 countries participated in this poll over a period of, I think, 1.5 months before we assessed the data. And the PD Health is working with the results alongside other communication teams to see how do we boost vaccine confidence with the information we got from your reporters. It was interesting to hear some of the rumors they said they've got around the vaccines, and that's better helping us also inform how we communicate to these communities. So we ran the COVAX poll. We have the COVAX chatbot that's also ready for countries to roll out. Several countries have already been sharing this out. All your reporters need to do is type in a trigger word, then they get all the information they need. The chatbot is based on a web explainer that's on the UNICEF page. So we're directly communicating with PD Health and immunization that's informing all the information we send out to your reporters. Then also it's important to note that this is on top of what we already did with the COVID chatbot earlier before the vaccines were readily available, which reached up to 5 million people in the first 6 months when we started sharing the chatbot. So I think we're doing quite a lot on that end. I think someone also asked about what have been your failures on your report. Well, I mean, failure is relative, and I think looking at a platform like UReport, which really our birthplace is Office of Innovation. For us, it's the failures that we've learned from. It's the failures that have made UReport what it is 10 years down the road. For me, I would look at it maybe more of challenges or missed opportunities, but then also what's also springing us into action as we move ahead. For example, right now we're having the Facebook policies that have been set up that are complicating the engagement for UReport platforms, especially in Europe and countries where Facebook Messenger is the main platform that's being used, and these are policy guidelines that are set, which you might not be able to explain to that reporter that, this is a policy guideline when they're getting frustrated with either failing to send the message or the program manager who then can't run Facebook advertisements for a poll. So we're working around that with Facebook, but it's a challenge that has been going on for quite a while right now, and several countries are a bit frustrated with it, notwithstanding the fact that something is being done about it. So I wouldn't call it a failure on our part, but it's also, I think, woken us up to the fact that we need to explore having our mobile application again. Maybe it's about time that we have our own UReport app, same way you have Instagram, Viber, TikTok, then you have your UReport app. We used to have that, so we are reviving that, but making sure this time it's more sustainable. It really addresses the needs of the user as well as the programs as well that would support it. But also in terms of sustainability, we have some UReport countries that have shut down, So we mentioned we have 77 countries right now, but that doesn't change the fact that probably I think 2 or 3 of them have closed their UReport, So and that's why I mentioned from the onset, as you start your report, be very clear, where is the budget going to come from to run it? Who's the team that's going to run your report? You can't have someone who's both the M&E at the same time managing your report, You need someone dedicated. So I think it's all those examples that, depending on how you look at it, whether half full or half empty, the glass, failure or not failure or just opportunity, but we've had those scenarios as well. In terms of the question on UReport on children's rights, I mean, different countries have used UReport for children's rights. I mean, children's rights are really broad. Health is a right, education is a right, water and sanitation is a right. So it depends on if you're just meaning in the concrete, in the strict sense of the Convention on the Rights of the Child and informing communities on what it is, what are the rights, do people believe in them? But also just to say, you don't exactly need a book that's written for every single thing that UReport can do. You can be the one to set up the chatbot on CRC, on the children's rights in the country that you're coming from. I think that was from Vedrana. So then when we have your information that you've shared with the UReport manager, they'll upload it into a chatbot on the children's rights, send it out, and then people can easily access it. Maybe just type CRC and get all the information they need. But I know a lot of countries, usually around World Children's Day, they do a lot around children's rights. So whether it's a poll you want to run or a live chat or a bot, really the opportunities are endless. Yeah, I think those are the main ones I picked up.
Thank you, Caroline. Did you mention about the ethics and the under 18s around asking questions? Okay.
So I think one thing that we're very cautious of, and I think we've been working on this closely with the ethics advisor, Gabrielle, who was on the call, I think, at some point. I think we're very cautious of the information that's also collected from under 18s. One thing for sure is also we have to be honest with the fact of what we can control when reaching these young groups, but it's inevitable that when we're sending out the poll questions, we let them know that what age group they are, and then the consent, do we have their consent to approach them and for them to respond to the questions that they're responding to. We have ethics guidelines. We have ethics guidelines that are guiding how we poll on UReport. We've been very strict on that currently, and we've been having ethic focal points that are now in the country offices to guide before questions go out. We don't want, I think Chris alluded to the fact that you don't want to humiliate anyone anymore, or discuss topics that might cause harm or pity. So I think we're really cautious on what we do with under 18s, but then also recognizing the fact that we're not going to say that they're not on the platform. They are some on the platform. And I think there are even countries who specifically want to work with children on the platform, but it's more of how do we follow the ethic guidelines and considerations in how we approach them? Do we have their consent? And how are we following the procedures that we have in place when interacting with them?
Thanks, Caroline. There's been a question from Beth about representativeness, and if it's not, then is it possible to examine trends like in a single country or setting?
I think, Chris, you come in again on this with the equity tool and the document that you worked on with Balaji. I think for me, that's, I think, one of our best deliverables right now out of UReport for the times when we get this question on, is UReport representative or is it not? So Chris, over to you on this.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. I think the equity tool, I think I've talked about quite a bit, and that is certainly a way for us to increase representativeness. Maybe I'll address a couple different questions that are on this same topic and kind of wrap them all up into one. People are asking, is it possible to do a second wave of the same poll? I believe the original question that you mentioned, Archana, was, is it possible to have like a matching sample to understand, is there a change within this sample over time? It is possible to have a select group within UReport that is engaged more than once on a particular topic. Of course, you can't guarantee that these people will continue to respond, but you could certainly do a kind of a time series or multiple wave approach. Either you could send that wave to everyone in the platform, or you could send it to a smaller group. But if you're sending it to everyone on the platform, of course, you could also just kind of create these matching samples yourself. Yeah, I think that is possible. If the person who is asking that question wants to give more detail, if that's necessary for a good explanation on that, then I'd be happy to answer that as well.
I think there's
Beth says, sorry, the question is not about representativeness. Is it possible to examine trends? I'll just say that it is possible to examine trends. We can examine trends in multiple waves of different respondents, or we can examine trends among a single set of respondents over time. And that would involve sending, engaging a single poll over, say 2 times a year, or whatever would be the cadence that you'd be looking for. I hope that answers the question, Beth.
Okay, great. I also note, sorry, go ahead, Caroline.
Yeah, I think there was someone who mentioned something about on recruitment, that are we being proactive enough? Priscilla, I think you are trying to clarify your question. Probably, I think what I could say on that is, the more proactive we can be, definitely the better. And this will vary from one country office to another. And that's why I said, especially during COVID-19, the tactics that are being used are really completely variable. Some country offices are harnessing their digital platforms to advertise, exploring radio, TV, newspaper adverts to scale up your reporters in their countries, because now with less congregation and with the rules around, congregation of people and the spread of COVID-19, a lot is changing on that end. But definitely we can be more proactive. And anyway, any ideas you have, you can share. We're definitely open to that as well.
Thank you, Caroline. I'm just running through. I think there's a few that we missed. So if anybody else could also help me, Nima, if there's any specific ones. I'm just looking. Oh, there was one question actually somebody had sent before the webinar had started, and it was about how do you, or maybe you had answered it, sorry. It was about the government and how do you get them actively participating or agreeing to do that. I'm just looking through here as well. While I'm looking through, I think what an important thing that came out in this presentation from the data side of it is, which we talked about a lot, is the representativeness. And I liked what you had. I think it was Chris that wrote down. It's not for representativity, but it's for credibility. So I think that's an important component as we go forward and how we use this. I know that UReport was used a lot in terms of gathering information, especially for messages, but also gathering information within the early part of the COVID, and continues to do so. And Caroline, I really liked your point about making sure that it's useful data. So first of all, seeing if data is actually existing and how do we use that, as opposed to going out and collecting the data. So I think that's another very useful point to keep in mind. Is there anything else? I hear all these pinging and it's hard to keep track of everything.
I could make, as you check.
Yes. Okay.
As you check through the others, I could maybe take those I've seen. I think on how do we get governments interested and on board, maybe again, starting a bit with the person who asked about what are the failures, is also mentioning that some governments have stopped the use of, we've not got their go ahead and have your report in some of the countries that we have, like right now in Egypt, we can't exactly launch your report yet for political reasons. But then even in Pakistan, your report was closed, including for political reasons. So you'll find not all governments are absolutely welcoming on having the platform for various reasons. And this may either associate with the overall, limitations they have on social media, not specifically just for what your report is. But that does not change the fact that looking at the brighter side for governments that have used your report and how we've got them on board is, first of all, starting with, I think this is typically called proof of concept, showing that it works, and the power of having perceptions from young people in real time on issues that concern them. Giving you an example again on how we're able to have the Committee of Health in Nigeria to come together to just listen to poll responses on your report that we had run, but then also we had House of Representatives who had used the platform to get feedback from their communities. I'm sure for several politicians, if this would save save you a weekend trip to your village. Some of them thought maybe, how about, if this can quickly get me the data, then I would still show up in the Senate or the House of Reps and deliver with feedback and perceptions that are coming from the UReporters. And again, as we say, it's like you're testing the pulse. You're trying to find out what they feel, what they think, so it's not statistical scientific data per se, it's perceptions. You see several polls running on Facebook, on different channels. And I think for leaders who are able to harness this and utilize it, same way they would go back to their constituencies, they've found added value and utilized the platform. We have several documented examples on how this was done. In Uganda, this was also able to inform the youth fund. They had set up a criteria on accessing the youth fund, which I think one of the requirements was an O-level certificate and a bank account. And the UReporter said that was unfair, and that particular requirement was struck out, And we have all this documented in whether it was parliamentary newsletters we're sharing then, and we're happy to share with you some of those success stories which leaders are interested in seeing. And if we can do this closely with program sections that are oftentimes meeting with government partners, that would be super helpful.
I also just was reviewing the questions. There was one question on cost. I don't know if you referred to that one. I don't think so. A cost of running something like this.
Yeah, I think we had included in the presentation an estimation of about $150,000 in the first year, and that's including both the staffing cost of probably a TA you'd have at the onset, but then also looking at the platform itself, Nyaruka, that we mentioned, where the Rapid Pro platform is hosted. So looking at least 150,000 in the first year.
Okay, thank you. Any else? I'm quickly running through, which is really great that there was lots of questions, which shows great interest. If anybody wants to raise their hand, if we've missed going through this, but of course we will go through each and every one to make sure that there was an answer if we missed anything post the webinar. Anything that I've missed? Okay. Well, thank you, Caroline and Chris. I think this has been a really engaging hour and a half. I think we've learned a lot. For me particularly, I think it's really interesting about how this platform has evolved in the 10 years and where it's going to go. I think it's important to understand what the data tell us and how it can be used. And as you, Chris, said, to use it as a sort of a pulse and see what's going on, but also to triangulate with other things as well. I also think that it's important to see where this goes in the future and how UNICEF can harness it for the purposes that it's meant for. So I thank you both, Caroline and Chris, again, for a very engaging webinar. I'd like to remind everybody that the next webinar of this series will take place next Thursday, and it will be on census, developing a census methodology that is fit for purpose in changing times. Ian White will be our presenter next week. And I thank you everyone for your participation and for the great questions